Welcome in, Irish fans, to another episode of Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. I am your host today, Ben Belden. You can follow me on Twitter at RealBBelden. Make sure that you join the Twitter over there and you join in and join the conversation. I often talk about things that I talk about on Twitter. So if you like the conversation here, follow me over there on Twitter. Make sure you're supporting Mark Rogers TV and his page. If you like the content that Mark and some of his other creators create over here, make sure that you're doing what you can to support that so that can continue. But today, talking about some breaking news, that unfortunately I think many were expecting to happen. And it was just a matter of time, and that's the decommitment of 5-star edge rusher Keon Keeley. There's a lot of ways I could go with this, I suppose, talking about Keon Keeley and his decommitment from Notre Dame. First of all, if you've missed the news, like I say, just a little bit ago, about 20 minutes, half hour ago, news broke from Keon Keeley himself, his Twitter account, and obviously the others have picked it up and run with it, that he is going to decommit. He has decommitted from Notre Dame. This obviously is a big loss for the Irish in the 2023 recruiting class. We're going to talk about kind of what that means, where Notre Dame goes from here, and some big picture things, I guess, that go along with this. So we got a couple people coming in here making some comments, and like I say, I'm going to probably address some of these comments that are coming in the live chat here pretty quickly. But my first reaction to this Keon Keeley decommitment, my first thought about this, honestly, is, well, don't overreact. I think that, this is a real easy one to overreact to, potentially because, obviously he was kind of the crown jewel of the 2023 class. He was the guy that, if you were going to point to, this is going to make Notre Dame really good in the future. This is a game changer, a playmaker, especially on the defensive side of the football. I think that this one particularly stings pretty bad in that regard. Now, here's the other thing. Notre Dame is still recruiting at a high level. Okay, this is obviously going to knock them down a little bit, and obviously is going to, potentially take them out of that top spot, and we'll see kind of where the dominoes fall after that in terms of the recruiting classes. However, okay, it's important to understand that there are other prospects that Notre Dame can look to. They're going to get a good edge rusher in this class. Samuel Mpemba from IMG Academy is probably the next guy up high on their list. I know that some people have kind of varying ideas about where Notre Dame stands with him. And one question that's already been posed in the chat that I wanted to address is, can we push for him again? Yes. I mean, I don't know. And as I answer kind of this question, I guess I'll kind of, and again, I got to make this very clear. I don't have, inside information. I speculate. Okay. Another question that's in here, by the way, that we'll also talk about, is this more about NIL or NFL draft prospect? And again, we're going to kind of talk about both of those types of things. Here's kind of what I think happened. I think that, Keon probably has actually kind of been a silent decommit to Notre Dame for a little bit now. Sort of seems like Marcus Freeman is the kind of guy that would prefer to, have his answer. If this guy is going to, talking about Keon Keeley, if he's going to take official visits elsewhere, we'd rather him just be decommitted at this point. And I have a feeling that those conversations are kind of what happened. Keeley, was starting to take some visits elsewhere. Obviously, the big one is Alabama, and the crystal balls, obviously, for Keeley is that he's going to end up at Alabama now that he's decommitted from Notre Dame. And, I think Notre Dame kind of said, hey, listen, like, you committed here. If you want to take official visits and things elsewhere, then you need to decommit. We need to know where we stand, because we're putting together a class. We're putting together something really special here in Notre Dame. And we need to know right now where you stand. And I think they kind of pushed the envelope, and that kind of ended up with Keeley decommitting. Now, I think it's important also to kind of be careful where the speculation goes with this. There are all kind of things that you could say are the reason for this decommitment. One of them obviously is NIL. And if that's the case, I mean, you got to feel bad for a guy like Marcus Freeman, who really has seemingly done everything right on the recruiting trail. He's a great guy. He's a guy that clearly people want to come play for. And obviously that was enough to land a guy like Keon Keeley in the first place. And if it's for NIL reasons that Freeman and staff are missing out on, one of the better players that was going to commit and come to be in South Bend in recent memory. If NIL ruins that, then you got to feel bad. You got to feel bad for that. And again, I have no idea if NIL had anything to do with it. If it had, the question was asked earlier, is this about his draft prospects? I don't think so. I mean, if you're that good and you go, if you're one of the top recruits in college football, and I think it's pretty easy to say that Keeley is. I mean, everywhere he's ranked very highly, 5-star recruit. I think that, it doesn't matter where you go between Notre Dame and Alabama. It doesn't matter if he would have gone to Oregon. It doesn't matter if he'd have gone to Oregon State. It doesn't matter if he'd have gone to Appalachian State. If you're that good, you're going to be picked. And so, I don't think, I have my feeling that this really mostly just boils down to a 17-year-old kid. That is kind of second guessing one of the bigger choices that he's going to make in his life. And there's a lot of things that go into that. And so it's hard. It's hard. Now let's talk about Notre Dame for a second. Because, obviously now the narrative is going to change about Notre Dame. Obviously, this is going to make the recruiting class take a mega hit. I didn't check before I came on here whether, 24/7 has gone on and updated their recruiting rankings by class or any of that type of stuff. But obviously, this is going to take Notre Dame out of the top spot. And if and when he commits to Alabama in the near future, then they're going to have the top spot. The bottom line, though, is this, okay? Much of the narrative, the national media, the people on Twitter, the people from Ohio State and Michigan that like to dog on Notre Dame are going to make this sound like a big deal, are going to try to really blow this up and use this as another talking point about Notre Dame. The truth is, right now, without Keeley in the class, is this class, exceptional? Is this class a class that, is way far and away blowing most of Brian Kelly's classes out of the water? Not really. This class now probably resembles some of the better classes from when Brian Kelly, assembled his highest ranked classes at Notre Dame. But here's the bottom line. Okay. Marcus Freeman is achieving, in this 2023 recruiting class, a recruiting class that is, one of the better ones that Brian Kelly ever put together in 12 years at Notre Dame. And Marcus Freeman is doing it as a first-year head coach with no experience, hasn't even really truly coached an actual game yet. And I don't count the bowl game really because, if you really want to get technical with it, I mean, not a lot. I don't think we learned very much about Marcus Freeman in that particular bowl game about who he is as a head coach. For me, it's still very, very obvious that Marcus Freeman is continuing to change the culture about Notre Dame and the perception of Notre Dame. I think that things, regardless of Keon Keeley, regardless of one kid decommitting, I think that there's no argument that things from the recruiting standpoint are still pointing straight up, and that as Notre Dame continues to build on this recruiting success that they've had, even with the decommitment of Keon Keeley, that Notre Dame is going to be just fine. And I see, a few people are in the chat kind of echoing that sentiment. We will be fine. I think that's fair. The other part is that if, again, like I say, there's still a lot of really good players in this 2023 class. There are still players that, Notre Dame can go and get, other edge rushers that can be the big edge rusher in this class. And again, Tom Loy at 24/7 Sports has already put out an article about certain players to watch for Notre Dame to kind of go after as they try to recruit that edge rushing spot. I'm not going to divulge that because, that's Tom's information. It's behind that paywall for a reason. So make sure you go over to 24/7 Sports or whoever you support and you support those guys and you can read more about those types of guys. I'm not going to claim to have any inside information about that myself. But Notre Dame will be fine. The trajectory is fine. And here's the other thing I mentioned. Marcus Freeman has not coached a game at Notre Dame yet. He has not coached a regular season football game at Notre Dame yet. And, I actually was planning on going live tomorrow night, scheduling a live stream to talk about Keon Keeley's potential decommitment and to talk about some other things. Probably will still do that, except I will have talked about Keon Keeley ad nauseum at that point. So that part will probably be left out of tomorrow's show. But, assuming that recruiting success for a first-year head coach only gets better, and Notre Dame's off to a really good start in 2024 as well, and assuming that the on-field production is there, at least reasonably, there's no reason to think that Notre Dame is in any type of here. I'll be honest with you, there's a very real possibility that Notre Dame has a very typical Notre Dame season, goes 10-2, 9-3, whatever the situation is. And that would be just fine for a first-year head coach who is recruiting at a really high level. And like I say, that doesn't change because one of the top, depending on who you look at, one of the top 20 players in the country decommitted from Notre Dame. That doesn't change. Notre Dame will be just fine without Keon Keeley, and I'm not even 100% convinced yet that he's out of the question. I think that there's a chance that this was a hey, I just like to open up my recruitment, and maybe he ends up coming back because obviously if he committed at some point at some point there were a lot of things that he liked about Notre Dame and the coaching staff, and it's not that he fell out of favor with the coaching staff. I think it's, again, a 19-year-old, not even a 19-year-old, a 17 to 18-year-old kid who is making one of the biggest decisions of his life and is getting a lot of attention and is a little bit, confused on the edge, as is to be expected of a kid. Again, like I say, we're talking about kids. We're talking about kids who have a lot of adults in their ears and are, a lot of, and things can go a lot of different ways. So I look for Notre Dame to bounce back from this. Obviously, like I say, there's no, you can't say this enough that this is a big loss, a huge loss, because he's really good at football. Okay. He's a really good football player. Keep on text. Maybe we get him back. Maybe we don't. Notre Dame has a really good 2023 class as it is. We're going to, and the Irish are going to be just fine as they navigate through this season, as they continue to put their class together in 2023, 2024, and don't go to the skies falling because, like I say, one of the best players in the class of 2023 decommitted from Notre Dame. To be honest, the fact that Notre Dame was even being considered from a guy like Keon Keeley, that Notre Dame ever landed a commitment from a guy like Keon Keeley is enough of a indicator that things are going well enough for Notre Dame at this point. So I'm going to leave it there. Make sure that you support the channel. I think we had maybe a little bit of a slow connection earlier. So those of you that have joined throughout, thank you for your comments in the chat and all of that. Make sure that you're supporting Mark Rogers TV. My Twitter handle is on the screen at RealBBeldon. Oftentimes I get on here and continue the conversation on Twitter, or take a conversation from Twitter and talk about it here on this show. So again, this is Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. I'm Ben Belden. Thank you for listening. And until next time, go Irish.